Hey everyone, Miss Story Mystery here. Welcome to my channel where the strange, the eerie, and the unexplained come to life. Today I've got a collection of chilling stories that will make you question reality itself. From phantom dogs to encounters that can't be explained, these stories have stayed with me, and I think they'll stick with you too. So, settle in and let's dive into the unknown. Growing up, my grandparents had this big gray German shepherd named Max. He was the kind of dog you'd expect to see in movies, loyal, watchful, but oddly enough, my grandparents kept him chained up in the yard. I don't remember anyone really interacting with him except us kids. Whenever we stayed at our grandparents' house, my sister and cousins would help me bring leftovers out to Max. We'd leave the food in his bowl and then run off, leaving him behind, still chained up on that concrete slab. It's strange now that I think about it. He was always just there, almost like a forgotten part of the yard. As time passed, my family moved a few hours away, and our visits became less frequent. Max was already an old dog by then, but I remember seeing these large tumors growing around his neck. And then one day, Max was just gone. No explanation, no goodbyes. Years later, as a teenager, I brought Max up to my dad, curious about how he'd passed. We had just lost our family dog to cancer, and it made me wonder if that's what had happened to Max, too. My dad gave me a strange look and said, "Max? He died of cancer a long time ago. But that was my first dog." His first dog? I was confused. My dad had always told me about a dog named Boots when he was younger, and then my dad drops a bombshell. Max wasn't the dog we all remembered. Max had died when he was 9 years old. 1969. I thought he was just misremembering, but then something weirder happened. My sister and cousins, they all remembered Max too. A dog that, by all accounts, shouldn't have existed when we were kids. Now, here's where things start getting really strange. After Max was supposedly gone, my grandparents put a shed over the spot where he was always chained up. I didn't think much of it at the time, but there are photos of us. Me and my cousins, some 12 years younger than me, playing in the yard with that shed in the background. And yet, those cousins? They also have memories of Max, a dog that would have been dead by then. But here's the part that still gives me chills. When I was 18 or 19, I helped my dad and uncles tear down that old shed. Beneath it, on the concrete slab, we found something that still haunts me. There, right on the edge of the platform, was a child's handprint with my dad's name written underneath, and next to it, a huge paw-shaped impression, the size of a German shepherd's paw. Underneath that paw print, in the same handwriting, was the name Max. That shed had been there for years, and yet somehow, all of us, my cousins, my sister, me, remember Max. We played with him, fed him, and felt his presence. But Max died in 1969, 2 decades before I was even born. To this day, none of us can explain it. We all remember Max, but by the time we should have known him, Max had been gone for years. Why do we remember him? And how can a dog that died decades ago have left such a lasting impression, literally and figuratively? It's a mystery I can't shake. Max, the dog that none of us were supposed to meet, yet somehow all of us remember. I must have been about 5 years old, staying at my grandparents' house. They had this old brass bed in the spare bedroom where I slept alone. Underneath, there was a rollaway bed for my brother, and that night it was pulled out and set up next to mine. The only other thing in that room was a small closet in the far corner, the kind of closet that didn't get used much, so it always had that slightly eerie feel. In the middle of the night, I woke up to this sound. At first, I thought it might have been the creaking of the pull-out bed, but when I looked over, my brother was dead asleep. He hadn't moved. Then I heard it again, a slow, deliberate creak. My eyes drifted toward the closet, and that's when I saw it. The closet door was creaking open. I stared, frozen, not believing what I was seeing. And then a little man poked his head out. His head was too big for his body, with these huge, dark eyes that locked onto mine. I couldn't make out much else because the room was dark, but those eyes, they were so clear. He shuffled forward, his feet scraping against the floor in a slow, deliberate movement. The sound of that shuffling still haunts me. He stopped, looked up at me again, crouched down, and shuffled forward a bit more. It was as if he was sizing me up, daring me to move. When he got close enough to the bed, he dove under the rollaway. I could hear him moving through the springs and metal underneath my brother's bed. And then I felt him underneath my bed. I tried to hold my breath. My heart was pounding so loud, I thought it might wake my brother. That's when the second one came out. The closet door creaked open a bit more, and out stepped another little man. Same oversized head, same dark, all-seeing eyes. He did the exact same thing, looked right at me, shuffled a few feet forward, dove under the bed. I could feel him under there too, crawling through the springs. I didn't know if I should scream or run, but I couldn't move. I was paralyzed with fear. And then the third one appeared. This time, I couldn't hold it in. I screamed, loud enough that the little man turned and bolted back into the closet, slamming the door behind him just as my mom burst into the room. She flicked on the light, her face full of concern. She checked the beds, opened the closet, looked everywhere, but there was nothing. I tried to explain what happened, but all she said was, "You were just dreaming." But I wasn't dreaming. At least, it didn't feel like a dream. I was wide awake. Even now, as an adult, I tell myself I must have been hallucinating. Maybe I was in some half-awake, half-dreaming state. It wasn't the last time I had experiences like that. Strange dreams that felt too real. But this one stuck with me. I'll never forget the way those little men moved across the room, their big eyes staring at me, as if they were deciding whether to come closer or to take me with them. Back when I was newly married, my husband and I moved into this townhouse-style apartment. It was on the second and third floors of the building, and directly below us on the ground floor was the management office and mailboxes. The woman who managed the building, well, let's just say she wasn't the most pleasant. Imagine Juno, the social worker from Beetlejuice, but way less helpful. She had it out for us from the beginning. Claimed we lied about me being pregnant when we moved in because she didn't want to rent that unit to anyone with kids. This woman, let's call her Juno, resented us, and the feeling was mutual. Fast forward to after our baby was born. I was a stay-at-home mom, juggling, taking care of the baby and the apartment. One winter day after lunch, I was giving the baby a bath because, well, anyone who's fed a 9-month-old knows the mess they can make. I had the tub running. The baby was in one of those suction cup bath seats splashing around happily. Now this was midwinter, and we had no heat. Yeah, another ongoing battle with Juno. The apartment was a mess of problems. Our ceiling fan was arcing, the garbage disposal was duct taped together and leaked, and we had to rely on space heaters just to keep from freezing. I had one of those space heaters in the bathroom that day, sitting up on the counter, far away from the water. As I stood in the tub, ready to lift the baby out, the heater, completely still just moments before, suddenly started rocking back and forth. And not just a slight wobble. It was moving like something was pushing it. A wave of dread hit me. I knew I couldn't get both of us out of the tub in time. Instinct kicked in. I grabbed the baby seat, yanked it up off the tub, and dropped the baby onto the bathroom floor over the side of the tub just as the heater reached the end of its cord. It slammed into the shower door, bounced off the edge of the tub, and landed on its side, just inches away from where we'd been. Luckily, it had an auto shut-off feature, so it turned off when it tipped over. But here's where things get really strange. As I caught my breath, I noticed something in the corner of the bathroom. The air seemed darker, like shadows were gathering, but there was no change in the lighting. No windows, no smoke. Just this thick, oppressive darkness. And then I smelled it. Camel non-filters. The same smell that used to hang in Juno's office. The smoke was so thick it made my chest ache, but I couldn't see any actual haze, just the smell. And along with it, this feeling of pure hatred, like someone was standing there glaring at me. I grabbed the baby, wrapped him in a towel, and bolted downstairs. I was too freaked out to go back up there. We stayed downstairs the rest of the day. Every now and then I'd glance up the stairs at the bathroom, but I wasn't about to go near it, and I definitely wasn't leaving the baby alone. When my husband got home, he asked why the baby was still wrapped in a towel. I told him about the heater and the smoke, and he went upstairs to check it out. He thought it was just another electrical issue, but there was nothing. No damage, no smoke, no smell. He even set the heater back on the counter, turned it back on, and watched it. It stayed perfectly still. No rocking, nothing. He laughed it off, chalked it up to my imagination. But later that day, we heard Juno's adult son down by the mailboxes screaming at people. Turns out, Juno had suffered a massive heart attack in her office earlier that day. Her son had found her slumped over in her chair, with a Camel non-filter still burning between her fingers. Whatever happened in that bathroom, I'm convinced it wasn't just in my head. That feeling, that presence, it was her, and she wasn't happy. When I was a new nurse, I was assigned a patient that some of the staff called difficult. But honestly, I really liked her. She had recently been diagnosed with cancer, and if she had bad days, who could blame her? We ended up talking a lot about her fears, my life, silly things, anything really. Over the course of a year, she came and went from the hospital for treatments, and each time we grew a little closer. During that same year, my life was changing too. I met someone and we got pretty serious. So, the next time I saw her, I excitedly told her, I'm getting married. I wanted her to come to the wedding, but as the date approached, she had to be admitted to the hospital again. She was too sick to attend. I couldn't stand the thought of her missing out. So, my entire wedding party and I made a stop at her hospital room to wish her well. The look on her face. She was so surprised, so happy. It's one of my favorite memories. Not long after that, my husband and I went off on our honeymoon. When I returned, I found out she had passed away while I was gone. It was heartbreaking. I kept thinking about how much she'd gone through that year and how grateful I was that I got to know her so well. Now, during that same year, my husband and I had been living in this tiny apartment. It was barely big enough for one person, let alone the two of us. We tried to make it work, but after a while it was just too cramped. So I started looking for a new place. I found an apartment that was within walking distance to work, much bigger, and even had a garage. The best part? It was actually cheaper than the little shoebox we were living in. The only downside was that we didn't have enough furniture to fill the place, but family and friends helped us out, and within a few weeks, we moved in. We loved it. It was such a relief to finally have enough space to invite people over. Our parents would come by for dinner, and friends started hanging out at our place all the time. One friend, though, kept insisting the apartment was haunted. He said he could feel it, but whatever it was, it didn't seem like a bad spirit. We'd occasionally hear strange knocks, but we didn't think much of it. Then, one day, I got some mail addressed to the former tenant. And this is where things get interesting. The name on the mail? It was my former patient. The one I'd spent that entire year caring for. I couldn't believe it. Of all the apartments in the city, we had moved into her old place. The strangest part? The apartment had been vacant for about 6 months before we moved in, which meant it had been sitting empty right around the time she passed away. I still don't understand why it sat empty for so long, but maybe it was meant to be. Maybe, in some way, she was still keeping an eye on me. When I was little, I had this overwhelming sense of paranoia. It got to the point where I'd even bathe with the door open. I guess I can blame my brother for that. He loved scaring the hell out of me. He'd always come up with these stories, telling me he'd see people outside our windows, watching us. Of course, now I know most of it was just him messing with me, but back then, I didn't. So there I was, taking a bath with the door open as usual, soaking in the warmth, feeling pretty relaxed. That's when I saw it. And yeah, I don't expect everyone to believe me. Maybe I was tired or just freaked myself out, but I swear I saw this grayish, white figure hobble past the door. I freaked out, started crying, and refused to leave the bathroom until one of my parents came to get me. They thought I was being dramatic, but I know what I saw. Flash forward about 5 years. Life was pretty normal. Nothing strange had happened since that night. I was staying at a friend's summer home in Palm Springs for the night. I crashed out pretty quickly on a futon, which surprised me. But that's when I had the dream. In the dream, I woke up in my own bed at home. Everything looked off, though. The only way I can describe it is that the light in the room had this dark blue tint, like it had a thickness to it, as if it wasn't just filling the room, but coating it. That's when I saw it again. The same kind of grayish figure hobbling into my room from the hallway. This thing, it was disturbing. Picture someone with the body of a starved basketball player, long and lanky, but with a sickly skeletal frame. It shuffled over to my bookshelf, which was across the room, and this is where it gets weirder. It crawled up the bookshelf and clung to it like some kind of twisted creature. I didn't want to look at its face. I couldn't, but it was looking at me, and then, in a voice that sounded like it came across the street, not across the room, it asked, "What are you doing?" The voice didn't seem threatening. It almost sounded concerned. At the time, I didn't think about responding. I don't usually take part in my dreams. I just watch them play out. Then the thing said, "My job is to watch you." And that's when I woke up. It was 4 a.m. I was relieved to find myself back in my friend's bed, clutching the pillow like it was my lifeline. But here's the thing. I couldn't shake the feeling that what I saw in that dream was the same figure I'd seen years ago when I was little. It doesn't stop there. I'm not a superstitious person by any means, but this really messed with my head. I told a friend of mine who's more into the occult, and while they didn't have an answer, they offered to do a banishment ritual. I politely declined. I didn't think it had come to that. A few days later, I'm drifting off to sleep again when I hear this strange sound, like trilling or some kind of weird laughter. It reminded me of turkey noises, but not quite. And that far-off voice, I recognized it immediately. Again, I did nothing. Then I felt it. Something grabbing me by the upper arms, lifting me up and then dropping me back onto my bed. Before I could react, it happened again, but this time I was dropped onto the floor. I figured I must be dreaming, so I went back to sleep. The next morning, I woke up on the hardwood floor beside my bed. Now, I hadn't sleepwalked in years, so I brushed it off as that. But when I went to the bathroom to get ready for the day, I noticed red marks around my shoulders, exactly where I'd felt myself being grabbed. I'm not saying this is definitive proof that ghosts are real. It could just be a string of strange dreams. But it doesn't make it any less terrifying when you're the one living through it. I work at a hotel, and while I've seen my fair share of strange things, there's one experience that sticks with me more than anything else. It was around 3:30 a.m. I'm a night auditor, and one of my early morning duties is setting up the coffee bar for guests who like to head out before dawn. The coffee bar is to the right of the front desk, and about 50 feet from there is the breakfast buffet in the kitchen area. It's pitch black over in that section, with no staff around at this hour. I usually start by grabbing the tea box from the cabinets under the breakfast buffet, which directly faces the kitchen so the staff can easily stock and greet guests later in the morning. So there I am, crouched down, rummaging through the cabinets, when something catches my eye. I look up toward the kitchen, and I freeze. There's someone standing back there, in the dark, watching me. This figure at least 6.5 feet tall, is looming in the shadows, wearing a heavy olive green coat. The light from the hallway barely catches his torso, but it's enough for me to know he's staring straight at me, and I'm staring right back at him. Then, without a sound, he lifts both legs at the knees and floats out of the door. At first, it didn't hit me that I might have just seen a ghost. My initial reaction was, this has to be some guest messing around. I was pissed. I've dealt with a lot of weird stuff working nights, but I wasn't in the mood for games. So I took off running, determined to catch this guy and kick him out of the hotel. But when I searched the employee hallways, there was no one. No guest, no sound, nothing. It took me a while, several minutes honestly, to admit to myself what it could have been. A ghost. The thought hadn't even crossed my mind at first. But once it did, I started to piece together all the other strange things I've experienced here. Disembodied voices in empty rooms, the back door slamming shut when no one's around, footsteps echoing down the 5th floor, only to find the hallway completely empty. Since that night, I've seen 2 more ghosts in the lobby. But here's the thing, it's never scary when it happens. Your brain just refuses to accept that you're seeing something paranormal. It has to be a guest who just couldn't sleep, right? It has to be. Or maybe it's something else. When I was about 8 years old, we lived in this old apartment, and let me tell you, a lot of strange things happened there. One night, my dad and I woke up sweating. The apartment felt like it was over 100 degrees. This was during a hot Texas summer, and the heater, of all things, was blasting full force. Now, the heater was on a separate system from the AC, and the breaker for it had been flipped off. But when we checked, the breaker had somehow flipped back on, the thermostat cranked to max, and the heater was running. My dad didn't turn it on, and I couldn't have reached the thermostat without standing on a chair, which would have made a lot of noise. The apartment was locked up tight, and nobody else was in the house. So, how did that happen? We had no idea. But that wasn't the first strange thing. Another night, we were sitting in the living room watching TV. The kitchen was just about 10 feet away. Suddenly, we hear this loud banging sound, metal clanging against metal. My dad rushed into the kitchen, and there in the sink were several fridge magnets, those little alphabet magnets I used to play with. They had somehow flown a good 2 or 3 feet straight off the fridge and landed in the sink. Neither of us had moved, and there was no one else in the apartment. It just happened on its own. Then there were the pictures. We had a few hanging on the walls in the hallway, and one day they just fell. Except instead of falling straight to the floor like you'd expect, they somehow ended up standing upright, leaning against the opposite wall. These pictures were heavy. They wouldn't just bounce off the wall and land like that. It was bizarre. All during this time, I started having nightmares. I'd hear chains clanging in the middle of the night, see strange figures in the shadows. Sure, it could have been my imagination running wild, but it all felt so real to me. My dad got curious one day and decided to record a silent room, just like a paranormal investigator would. We let it record overnight, and when we played it back, we heard something that chilled us both. There were voices, clear as day, speaking in German. It sounded like they were in the next room. But here's the thing, we didn't have any neighbors at that time. The apartment was completely silent when we recorded it, so where did the voices come from? After doing a bit of research, we found out that the apartments were named after the ridge they were built on, a ridge that German settlers had used as a lookout point back in the day. I don't know if that explains anything, but it was one more strange connection to everything we experienced there. I still don't know what really happened in that apartment, whether it was haunted or just a series of bizarre coincidences. But after almost 10 years of living there, we finally moved out. And to this day, those memories still give me chills. And that's it for today's dive into the weird and the unexplained. If you've ever had anything unexplained happen to you, I'd love to hear about it. Drop it in the comments. And hey, don't forget to like and subscribe if you're up for more creepy tales. Until next time, stay curious and maybe keep a nightlight on.